that the U.S. remains committed to the fight against ISIS despite the pending withdrawal from Syria.
Very much so. ISIS still a tremendous issue. Pompeo has supported, however, President Trump's plan for a drawdown and pull out of troops from Syria. He hasn't been quite as vocal as John Bolton has this week on all of that. It's clear that he stands shoulder to shoulder with President Trump on the theme of all of that. But we're not sure, of course, what that timetable will be yet. And that's something that he will have to articulate to those allies in the region, while still reassuring them that the U.S. will partner with them to fight the Islamic State all over the region.
All right, Nina, thank you so much. Nina Lawson. Let's talk more about this very important speech with my panel. We're joined by Middle East analyst Shai Franklin. He's a former executive of the World Jewish Congress. And Matthew Brodsky, senior fellow at the Security Studies Group. Gentlemen, thanks for being with us. And no doubt about it, Pompeo was very blunt, clearly rebuking the Obama administration's foreign policy, saying that Obama grossly underestimated the tenacity and viciousness of radical Islam, saying that in a way that the U.S. let down the region. Let's take a listen.
Remember, it was here in this city, that another American stood before you. He told you that radical Islamist terrorism does not stem from an ideology. He told you that 9/11 led my country to abandon its ideals, particularly in the Middle East. He told you that the United States and the Muslim world needed, quote, a new beginning, end of quote. The results of these misjudgments have been dire.
And Shai, just to remind the audience that this was very much in reference to President Obama's speech in Cairo, where Obama essentially said that the U.S. lost its way because of 9/11. Some would say that in a way Obama was victim shaming the U.S. with that. Let's take a listen to what Obama said then.
And finally, just as America can never tolerate violence by extremists, we must never alter or forget our principles. 9/11 was an enormous trauma to our country. The fear and anger that it provoked was understandable. But in some cases, it led us to act contrary to our traditions and our ideals. We are taking concrete actions to change course. I have unequivocally prohibited the use of torture by the United States, and I have ordered the prison at Guantanamo Bay closed by early next year.
Shai, that sort of plays out the contrast in a way between the two speeches. What was your response to what we heard from Pompeo today?
Well, he talked about a new beginning. President Obama spoke about a new beginning, but a lot of the Obama policies were basically a continuation of previous administrations. The George W. Bush administration and this current administration are the really outliers, I think. Generally, there's been a continuity of policy, of approach, promoting human rights and democracy while also trying to help our allies. The speech by Secretary Pompeo began by his proclaiming himself as an evangelical Christian. He's coming to the Middle East as an evangelical Christian. I don't think that's going to reassure a lot of people in the Middle East, particularly the people that were behind the Arab Spring in various countries.
An Arab Spring, which many, Matthew, say Obama started, but didn't really help follow through in terms of the consequences there. In the 30 seconds that we have before the hard break, Matthew, your initial reaction to the speech?
Speech that he certainly was drawing a distinction between the Trump administration and President Obama, who drastically shifted America's foreign policy. Obama had claimed that he was going to make a partnership between America and Islam. But the United States can even partner with a religion is a ridiculous concept. We make partnerships with states. But of a long list, of course, this is a very different approach in a foreign policy that they have labeled as America first.
Okay, we will continue to dissect the speech right after the break. Keep it here.
I'll be very blunt and direct today. America is a force for good in the Middle East. We need to acknowledge that truth, because if we don't, we make bad choices, now and in the future. And our choices, the choices we make today, have consequences for nations and for millions and millions of people, for our safety, for our economic prosperity, for our personal freedoms, and those of our children.
That was another defining moment from Secretary of State Mike Pompeo's speech in Cairo today. Pompeo set out to strongly reverse much of what President Obama said in that same city almost 10 years ago. During that speech, he also said that the age of America shirking its responsibilities in the Middle East is over. He gave the 25-minute address at the American University of Cairo. Let's continue with my panel about this important speech. Joining me is Shai Franklin, a Middle East analyst, and Matthew Brodsky, a senior fellow at the Security Studies Group. Matthew, as we were discussing before the break, clearly a very different tone from Pompeo than we heard from Obama. Many called Obama an apologist, apologizing for America. Here we have Pompeo saying that America is a force for good, that it will not shirk its responsibilities. Beyond the words, are we seeing that translate in the Trump administration's foreign policy so far?
Both Obama and Trump's speeches, Trump's in Riyadh and today's from Pompeo, they both remain aspirational. We already know the results of the Obama administration. He got it wrong in Egypt twice when it came to their uprisings. But what we have here is a policy that's designed to still go after Iran. Sure, that works, but we're missing some of the details. It's mostly an economic and diplomatic plan. This time, the United States fully backs Israel when it strikes militarily against Iran. Typically, that happens, of course, in Syria, but that also may end up happening in Lebanon. So it's good to see the United States standing shoulder to shoulder and pledging to make sure that Israel will have the military means to do so. But again, this speech is coming at a time where the president caught all of his advisors off guard by announcing a withdrawal. So that makes everything far more urgent. The purpose of these meetings to reassure, more than anything else, regional allies that the United States still has apparently the same mission, even though we're going to be tying a hand behind our back by leaving Syria. So that part has changed. What we're going to be doing with Assad has changed. Reconstruction now, we won't get into that if Assad holds territory, as long as Iran is still there, which means we could theoretically then be paying Assad, who killed 500,000 people, at some point in the future if Iran leaves. That's a starkly different message than we're giving to Iran, where we're standing fully with the Iranian people, which again is the opposite of what Obama did. But there you have it. It's a lot of details we still need to work out right now. So a lot of this message was about reassuring allies, and whether allies are reassured, I guess we'll find out by their actions.
Shai, do you think he succeeded in reassuring allies?
Maybe a few of the allies. Look, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, the main thing they want is military cooperation and economic investment. So on that, they probably got reassured. In terms of Syria, I don't know. In terms of Yemen, where I don't think that we've been a force for good the last couple of years with our Saudi allies, the Saudis are probably reassured, because Secretary Pompeo talked about peace. He didn't talk about humanitarian concerns so much in Yemen.
Is it safe to say, though, that the Obama administration's policy did in fact get it wrong? And many, including Pompeo, point out to the fact that, in a way, Obama was apologizing for the U.S.'s past actions in Iran, almost equating the mullahs in Tehran with the U.S. past, if you will, meddling in Iranian affairs. Let's take a listen back to what Obama had to say during his speech in Cairo.
For many years, Iran has defined itself in part by its opposition to my country. And there is, in fact, a tumultuous history between us. In the middle of the Cold War, the United States played a role in the overthrow of a democratically elected Iranian government. Since the Islamic Revolution, Iran has played a role in acts of hostage-taking and violence against U.S. troops and civilians. This history is well known. Rather than remain trapped in the past, I've made it clear to Iran's leaders and people that my country is prepared to move forward.
Shai, one could say, how could Obama even equate the U.S. administration or any U.S. administrations with the mullahs in Tehran? And one could point to the fact that has this goodwill from the Obama administration yielded anything, or has it just encouraged Iran to flourish in the region, which is a point that Pompeo made, that this just emboldened Iran and this was just simply wishful thinking by the Obama administration?
Well, first of all, President Obama, as President Obama said, the history is very well known, the 1954 overthrow of Mossadegh. That's a fact. He was reciting facts. He wasn't necessarily equating. He was going through the timeline. In terms of the results of the Obama administration, well, we'll never know, because the Iran deal was the main result. That was a result that we got with our main allies, not just in the region, in the Middle East. And I know the Saudis weren't so happy about it, or the Israelis weren't so happy about it, but our allies at the Security Council, our allies in Western Europe, they were on board with that. Japan was on board with that. And that's now been thrown away. So if we talk about working with our allies, we have lots of allies. I don't think that the Secretary Pompeo's speech, as Matthew said, is backed up necessarily by deeds yet. They're 2 years in. Any major initiative that President Trump was going to do would have been done by now, normally. In a presidential term, the first term, you have the first couple of years, you have midterm elections, and then everybody's already starting to campaign for the next election. So there's going to be no Middle East peace plan. Secretary Pompeo didn't even mention a Middle East peace plan.
Let's focus on the Iran aspect here, Matthew. To Shai's point, the Trump administration pulled out of what many, including the president, described as a disastrous deal. But even when that deal was in place, you did have Iran continuing its military aggression across the region, expanding into Syria, expanding into Yemen, funding groups, proxies like Hezbollah and Islamic Jihad and such. So is it safe to say that Pompeo is right when he says that the Obama administration's actions led Iran get to this point?
Look, those of us who were cynical when we heard Obama's speech 10 years ago, and he was talking about the outstretched hand, that, you know, if Iran reaches out with an outstretched hand, we'll take it and we'll talk and it'll be a new dawn in the Middle East. Well, yeah, it turned out that the outstretched hand was actually President Obama's hand, and in it were pallets of cash that he gave along with other goodies to Iran, which of course means that the United States helped underwrite a lot of Iran's foreign adventures and terrorism throughout the region, including an assassination attempt on a Saudi ambassador in Washington, D.C. That was in 2011, after, of course, he delivered his outstretched hand speech. In Egypt, look, we had where the speech is delivered in Egypt, this is where Obama managed to get it wrong twice. First, he helped overthrow Mubarak, finally, and then once the Muslim Brotherhood had taken power, who he boosted throughout the region, he then tried to keep them in power once al-Sisi came back in a counter-revolution So he's been on the wrong side of both issues. We've seen the results there. As to what we have going forward, that remains to be seen, because right now, a lot of this is diplomatic and a lot of this is economic when it comes to our plan on Iran. And we focused on the people, so I'm sure while the government policy is not to overthrow the regime, we would certainly not mind if the people did so and then had a regime that better represented them. I think there's much that we can be thankful that has been overturned that Obama pursued. But there's a lot right now that we should look at for details to see exactly how things are going to unfold, because no one makes money betting on peace in the Middle East.
That may be a sad and harsh reality, Matthew, but let's see, perhaps there is cause for fresh optimism. Shai, thank you so much for being with us. Appreciate your analysis. Matthew Brodsky, great to have you on the show. As always, we'll continue to